Good morning, Andy Hoare. Welcome to Friday 15, April 12th, 2024. We got an action-packed session for us today, Andy. Happy weekend, almost. Yeah, this should be a good one. We had a crazy week, Andy. We were all over the country. I mean, you and I keep traveling these days and meeting with practitioners, and we've got some exciting news to report from the field about some things that are, happening around the industry. But before we do all that, let's get into our new music. Wow. Actually, I just hit the wrong button, Andy.
Are we getting a new studio too, or just new music?
I don't know. Well, welcome again, everyone, to Friday 15. We got some breaking news here from the Master B2B world. I don't know if you saw this, Andy, but Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, released just 2 days ago, I think, the 2023 letter to shareholders. And what's fascinating, this was a long letter. You read it, yeah?
I did, and some things really surprised me. Like, I had no idea that Amazon had satellites. Did you know that?
Yeah, actually, I didn't know about the satellite effort. I mean, it's just incredible the number of businesses they're going into. It's incredible.
I couldn't believe that. I didn't know about the satellites. And one stat really stood out to me, which I guess I sort of knew, but it just hit me as wow statistic, which is they said that I think we're 85% of global IT spending is still on premise. So despite all of this work in the cloud, all people moving to AWS or Azure or private clouds or whatever, it's still only 15% of all global IT spending. The other 85% is still on-prem. I'm like, on-prem still?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I actually missed that. I missed that stat. That's interesting. That's incredible. I didn't realize that. And well, that's addressable market for AWS now, isn't it?
Well, that's where it showed up was, right. Believe it or not, we've got this. I mean, they always repeat the same thing about retail, despite the fact that I think they quoted 20% of retail is online, but 80% is offline. And then this AWS TAM, like you said, only 15% penetrated. I was like, wow.
That's amazing. Well, what struck me, and I, for those of you watching, I have a quote up here from the letter, but I'll read it. What struck me about this, Andy, was this concept they have of what they call primitives, which has been it's almost the operating system of Amazon. And he described in great detail, it's really an interesting read. He described in great detail how Amazon, breaks down their business. And it's not just technology, it's the fulfillment side. It's how they built marketplace. And what the whole notion, it was almost a precursor in some ways to this whole notion of composable commerce, right? Which is, you need to be really flexible and break things down to individual units in order to be nimble, which is a great precursor to our conversation today. But let me read what's on the screen here. Sometimes people ask us, this is Andy Jassy speaking, what's your next pillar? You have Marketplace, you have Prime, you have AWS. What's next? He said, this, of course, is a thought-provoking question. However, a question people never ask, and might be even more interesting, is what's the next set of primitives that you're building that enable breakthrough customer experience? And he said, Gen AI, right, as the answer. And so he spent a lot of time in this letter talking about Gen AI as the next, sort of frontier for Amazon as being a huge new addressable market. But again, what's fascinating about these primitives, the way they just define them, they're the raw parts or the most foundational building blocks. They're indivisible. They're meant to be used together rather than as solutions in and of themselves. And if you think about FBA, fulfilled by Amazon, you think about the way that marketplaces, the actual third-party selling marketplaces built. If they're well done, they actually accelerate a builder's ability, or creator or seller or business's ability to innovate. And I think that speaks a lot to the business planning and strategy conversation we're about to have. So let's keep that in mind as we dive into this. But it was a great read, and we recommend it.
I'll just say one thing about that is that I think Amazon, I think they've known this. They're just now letting the world know. They've become a platform. I mean, there are other examples of this, but you won't no longer building for yourself. You're building for the community that sits on top of your infrastructure, which is where the real money is. I mean, we all know from the Amazon marketplace, when they sell their stuff directly, That's one business model. But when they have other people in their marketplace and they make a percentage commission and they're doing the fulfillment and all the rest, that's a whole new level. I mean, the cost to serve that's much lower. All the work is done by the people in the marketplace,
Yeah.
and so Amazon doesn't. It's a way of scaling yourself, and I think what Amazon is now telling the world is we're going to build the foundation, the building blocks to
Yep.
let you scale your business, and we'll just take a little piece of every little transaction.
Yeah, no doubt, and I think and they're applying this sort of agile model to everything they go into. I'm curious how they're going to do this with with satellites and rockets and things. It's incredible, but it's really the operating system. So our topic today, is talking about how often, is the question, how often should your digital strategy be revised? And Andy, this week,
Revisited or revised,
or
but either
revised,
way,
yes, right.
how often
Thank
should
you.
you look at what you're doing, or just set it and forget it, right?
Well, I mean, it's almost set it and forget it, but it's really, hey, how much should, and having been a VP of e-commerce myself, Andy, it's how much do you need to stay on course, keep your resources focused, and stick to the plan versus paying attention to business changes that can come from many different areas, and we'll talk about those. But I was at the this week, Andy. We had a roundtable in Dallas. By the way, beautiful facility. We're on the 49th floor of this building in downtown Dallas, the Tower Club. Just incredible. You could see the sunset. It was awesome. We had about 30 practitioners there, people from Eaton and Prime Source Building Products and all kinds of different leaders. Doll Tile was there.
Yeah,
A
a bunch
number
of
of other,
billion-dollar companies nobody's ever heard of, right?
yeah,
That's the
right.
beauty
Well, the
of
funny thing, yeah,
B2B.
yeah, right. Like a great one is Doll Tile, right? Doll Tile is like the world's largest, like I don't know, $20 billion company. They make all the tile like in the world. And who the hell are they? People don't even know who they are. It's great. No, it's a fascinating group. And it was just great discussions. Fleet Pride was there. We had a number of others. And so that, but we asked the question, this question: how often should your business, plan be revisited? Your digital strategy. What's fascinating, Andy, is half the room said, hey, well, what plan? We actually beg. We think we challenge your assumption that the companies even have a plan, because, and these are VPs of e-commerce, and we had a couple CEOs and some all kinds of different folks in the room that managing e-commerce and digital. And it was funny to hear that from the room, and in fact, it bears out on the data. But other comments that I heard were like, "Hey, when business conditions change, if I'm not meeting my plan, or something happens to the business, oh hey, a global pandemic will do it, right?" We saw that acceleration. Buy online, pick up in store came up, or at branch or what have you. Like, we had to implement that really quickly. Once a year was a common, hey, we have this planning process and we revisit once a year, or hey, when the CEO says so, that's when we revisit it, or hey, we got to stick to the plan, right? So I heard a lot of different things, and so there's, I think, some confusion, but also some consensus came out of it, and we'll get into that.
I think there's good news and bad news here. The good news is this, in a way, I think unintentionally reinforces the idea that the digital strategy reinforces the business strategy. And they're
Right.
really one and the same, because the digital really is a means to the end of the business. So the question is, how often do you revisit your business strategy, right?
Yeah.
The
Hmm.
bad news is we're not 100% there yet, and digital is still organized as a separate entity, and so it can't be treated fully as a embedded part of the business strategy. So the good news is it is part of the business strategy. The bad news is it still needs individualized attention.
It does, and what's fascinating though, and I found some statistics, Andy, that said, in Forrester, I came out with this a couple of years ago, that said that only 61% of B2B decision makers said they have a formal digital strategy in place, which really goes to the the point in the room, which they were saying, hey, we don't agree with your assumption that everyone has a proven or written kind of documented strategy. But if I found this article here, and I'll read a bit of it for the folks on the podcast, from the Harvard Business Review, which talks about, and it's McKinsey, they're citing some McKinsey data. This is a quote from the article about business strategy and planning. What holds most leaders back is they don't translate vision into a structured plan that they keep in focus over time. Of course, leaders know how to set goals, create measurable KPIs, use dashboards, hold people accountable, etc. When change efforts require years, however, tracking often gets fuzzy and failing away in the face of digitally or rapidly changing business and economic conditions, and they force constant adaptation, right, to produce day-to-day results. So they're saying it's important to have a plan, but it's also the reality. What happens is you fall away from it. And when you look at the, some more data I found here, Andy. Oh, go ahead. You had a comment on the
No, no,
McKinsey. I was going to say what's interesting, and then chime in here, but this Journal of Management Studies found companies with written business plans grow 30% faster. They did a study of thousands of companies and found that there's a significant correlation between those that have a plan and their business results. So this is, to the McKinsey information in the Harvard Business Review, they can fall away from the plan, but it's important to have one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the challenge here is the short term versus the long term. A plan is by design over the long term, but these companies, many of whom are public companies, they don't have the opportunity to just set the 3 to 5 year plan, let's say even an 18-month plan, and then just wait 18 months to look at it. They have realities of weekly, monthly, and especially quarterly deliverables, and they got to produce numbers. And so that's really the art and science, is how do you balance the quarterly expectations with the multi-year plan? Because you can't just have quarterly plans and say, okay, at the end of the quarter, this is it, and we start a whole new plan next quarter. By the same token, you can't just set it and forget it for an 18-month or 3-year strategy and then just, hey, we'll revisit it in 3 years. So that's kind of the challenge here. But it is a bit disturbing to think that such a high percentage of companies don't even have a plan.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Well, Jason Hein, thanks for your comment. He chimed in here, Mr. Borg. When B2B companies think digital as a real business, that's when someone will actually ask for there to be a plan. So this may be a case where a lot of those companies don't yet think of digital as a real business yet. And that's and maybe that's the case, Jason. Maybe we're looking at those 40% understand digital needs to be a part of the business case, to your point, Andy, overall business case, right? But many may not. So that's that's a good point. Here's the thing though, Andy, right? So I pulled this. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon in 2016, he famously talked about day one versus day two companies. And this is a quote from his shareholder letter in 2016. It says, "Good process serves you so that you can serve customers. But if you're not watchful, the process can become the thing. This can happen very easily in large organizations. The process becomes the proxy for the result you want. You have to stop looking at outcomes and just make sure you're doing the business process right." Gulp, right? He says, becoming a day two company, slave to process, it's stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. Who wants that?
Well, this is so true. And I know we got other slides you want to get to quickly here, but one comment I'll make on this is that most companies are built for stasis. They're built for stability. They're built to execute, but they're not built for disruption. They're not built for self-assessment. And that's what he's talking about here. Day one companies don't have any of this stuff, so they're not beholden to it. Day two companies put a bunch of process in place, which is intended to help them execute and stabilize the company, especially for public markets. But then they become beholden to that.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they're executing for the sake of executing, or as the classic statement goes, they're having meetings about meetings.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. And so there's a real balance here, and our practitioners struggle with that. So, I think, ultimately where we walked away in Denver, or excuse me, Dallas at the roundtable, was a plan is important, but there are change signals that are important also to pay attention to. You can't stick your head in the sand and just follow the plan. That said, you have limited resources, right? You can't necessarily take your resources and pivot them 180 degrees in an instant, and you have to give up. This is what Rob Howell said, CDO at Reserve Bar. He said, "Hey, listen, when the CEO says to me, hey, change direction, do this thing," he says, "Well, what am I not going to do that?" Right?
You know what he should say? Show me the data that says we need to do that. That's what I would say. That's what Amazon would say. I don't care if you're the CEO, with all due respect. What I care about is, what are the customers telling me? But that's another discussion for another day.
Right. Well, we can talk through that. But here's some potential change signals, Andy, that from my experience as a VP of e-commerce for 17 years, and then what we heard in the room in the roundtable, change in business results. When you have your plan, what if you miss your goals? What if you miss your profit or sales goals? that tell you you're doing something incorrect and you need to adjust the plan. Emergence of new channels, marketplaces. I mean, I see this all the time with Amazon, right? With B2B companies. Should I pursue an Amazon business program? If you're a manufacturer, you should, but my opinion. But this presents a potential shift in your plan. Change of leadership. Hey, the CEO presenting a shiny object, or maybe you have a new CEO or a new boss that needs to weigh in and wants you to change your plan. Competitive pressures, right? Changes. What if your competitor launches something new, a new product line, new features, new website, new channels, new technologies, AI, right? Customer requests. The customer saying, "Hey, I want you to launch this feature so I can do business with you more easily." Macro changes, acts of God. Hey, a pandemic, anybody? That can't happen, right? How about a merger, an acquisition? I mean, these are all things that can signal that you need to revisit your plan. And I think the conclusion that the room came to in Dallas was that there needs to be a balance between having a plan, a structure, and being agile, right? It's almost like it's getting back to the primitives of the Amazon world. Maybe not as extreme as Amazon goes, where everything's broken down into components and agility, but it's almost being composable about your business plan, right? About how you approach your strategy.
I'm a sports fan, as you know, and I think that's a proving ground for a lot of this stuff. So I would use an analogy of having a game plan for a game.
Yeah.
So, we had the national championship this week, or it was early this week.
Yeah.
And both the coaches came in with a game plan, and they had decided this was the best path for them going forward, but they made adjustments throughout. So maybe that's a good analogy here, is to think about there are minor adjustments you make through the first quarter and the second quarter. At halftime, you step back, you take a breather, you go, okay, what have we learned? Sometimes you make some major changes. You take some people out, you change the offense, you change the defense, and then the goal is to win the game. What the challenge, as Simon Sinek said, is there's no end to the game.
Right.
So there isn't a fourth quarter. There's not a countdown and the game's over in 20 seconds. That said, I think companies tend to be more reactive than proactive, and they use these changes in the market that you cited, all of which are legitimate, as excuses to do things. And I don't mean that in a good way. So I'll give you a quick example. On the merger acquisition front, there's a company, somebody we both know actually, whose company recently acquired another company, and it took him completely off what he was working on. Now, maybe that's the right thing, or maybe it's not. But I just like a coach with a game, if a player gets injured, do you just throw the whole plan out and say, okay, now we're gonna move from man-to-man to zone, and I'm gonna have the center play point guard? No, you figure out how to accommodate that, but you don't start completely over. And I think too many companies, because they're about stability and process, all those things you described create disruption, and they react to that almost like the antibodies in your system to a virus. They attack it.
Right.
Let's attack the merger acquisition. Let's attack the new technologies. We've got to do something to destroy these things, put them down, and as opposed to saying, okay, this is part of our longer term business plan. It takes us in a slightly different direction, but it doesn't change what we're doing here.
Right. Yeah. To me, the conclusion in this is it's important to have a framework for a plan. You're not, in my experience, Andy, you don't know what's necessarily coming. I mean, I did this for a long time. You don't know what's coming. You have to leave some margin to be agile. You can have a plan. You have to have a structure. You have to have something to march against. You have to have a vision. And some of the articles talked about some of the B2B leaders who every year they put out a vision, and this is how we're going to work against our vision. But you have to have a structure to start with, but it's really important to be flexible. And this is, one other point I'll make, and then we'll get to our wrap up here in a second. But in my book, I cited a study by Korn Ferry a few years ago that talked about the successful digital leader is one who's not necessarily a driver as much as a collaborator, and someone who can accept that information is not perfect. You're going to be at 80%. You got to make a decision, and they have to be able to align the organization. And when you're working in this kind of environment, and to be flexible with your strategy, you have to take an approach that's a little more flexible. So,
well, I would say there's three things I would separate here. There's a vision, a strategy, and tactics. The vision should not change that frequently. If it does, you got really big problems, because that's the North Star. And how do you rally people around something that's constantly changing? The vision should be fairly fixed. maybe revisit that once every couple of years. I mean, look at Amazon. Their vision hasn't
Right.
changed dramatically over the years. Every couple of years, they revisit it, and maybe they change a few things here and there, but it's the same idea, right? Customer obsession, et cetera.
Yes.
The strategy should be like 18 months.
Mhm.
And that should be fairly fixed, but you should be looking at making changes based on things in the marketplace. But that one should change a little bit more than the vision, but not as much as the tactics,
Yeah.
which is the last piece. The tactics can change depending on the circumstances, but I get nervous when I hear about companies reacting to another company and changing their vision.
Right.
And I get just as nervous when people say, these are the tactics we're doing and we're locking on them, we're not going to change them. So there's a spectrum here,
Yep.
and you've got to realize the difference between the vision and tactics. They're not the same.
Yep. And going to the customer is always the best place to start and work backwards. That was in that shareholder letter from Jassy. So we asked our audience, how often should B2B companies revisit their strategic plan for digital? And it was close here. People think, I mean, the clear message here, what won is once per quarter, right? 39%. But following that closely was any time on business changes. The message here is agility, Andy. In this market, there has to be some level of agility in the strategy. That's what I took out of our poll results, right?
Yeah, and I kind of hear to the idea of having some structure around it, because I don't think, you know, you don't want to let events ride you. You
Right,
need to ride the
right,
events. And I
right.
think, obviously you have to be flexible. You got to make changes. In sports, teams just have something's not working, and they got to make a dramatic change in the middle of the game. But if you're constantly making dramatic changes, you're not going to win many games.
Yep. All right. Well, this is a robust discussion we've had today, boy. We're at past 20 minutes here, but let's just get to a couple of our announcements. And Jason, thanks for all your comments on those as you contributed here. Some upcoming events in Minneapolis is our next executive roundtable. We just did one in Dallas, Minneapolis, April 24th, a few weeks out. We still have a few. I think we have a waiting list at this point of
Yeah, we got a
practitioners.
waiting list
We're
now. Yeah.
packed. We got, I think, over 40 registered or something. Then we're going to be at B2B Online in early May. We have some executive dinners. We have some spots available for practitioners to join us for those. I'm excited about that. It's going to be a great conference. Andy and I are both speaking at that. And then finally, Denver coming up May 21st. We have our roundtable there as well, which is going to be really exciting. But then following that, we have our summit, which is on June 4th, University of Chicago. I think we have about 5 practitioner seats left or something at this point. Couple sponsorship opportunities still open if for folks who may want to get in on that from the solution provider side. But it's an exciting event, Andy. It's going to be 130 people at the Gleacher Center in the heart of downtown Chicago. Practitioner tickets, you can apply for a complimentary ticket there to attend. You just got to get your butt to Chicago for the day. We have dinner and a fun social at the end of that, so it'll be great. And then, of course, reminding everyone about our forum, which is just go to our website, masterb2b.com, click on forum, and you can apply for membership. It is only practitioners. We had, I think, about 10 more people join this week. So it's growing, man. We got some great people in there and lots of conversations. So anyhow, any final words, Andy, as we wrap our Friday 20 plus?
Yeah, I think people should think about Master B2B as a way to gut check a lot of these things. I mean, we do provide this opportunity to step back every so often, because it's hard to get people in your company to do this. You get your head down, you're doing your job, you see somebody a certain way. These are good opportunities, I think. I'm just thinking about this in real time here, to step away from that, see what other people are doing, and benchmark what you're doing and say, wait a minute, are we doing the right thing? And you hopefully walk out saying yes. But if not, it's a good place to learn in kind of a safe environment with a lot of knowledgeable people.
Absolutely. Well, folks, make sure you look at your favorite podcast platform. All of our Friday 15 episodes, Friday 20 episodes are up on there. You can listen to them while you're driving, doing laundry, or working out, or whatever you do. So we thank you for joining us. We will be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern for our next Friday 15. See you then, Andy.
See you then.